Go back into South Bend's history. 20 years, 50 years, 100 years, and what do you see? You see groups of people working to bring change to this city. They had different ideas of what that change should be. They didn't always agree. Yet, in every decade, there were groups of people for whom positive change was their life's work. This podcast, South Bend's Own Words, features the voices of people who helped make the city change. We'll share clips from the oral histories done by the Indiana University South Bend Civil Rights Heritage Center that tell a more complete history of the city. It's the story of many cultures, not just one. It's the story of South Bend. Dale Gibson was a longtime resident of South Bend and a teacher at Adams and the former LaSalle High School. As a white man, when he was growing up, he neither experienced nor recognized the segregation happening in South Bend. In college, he attempted to bring a black friend to a local swimming pool. His friend was not allowed in. That was Dale's first experience with direct racial segregation. It sparked a lifelong interest in the anti-war and racial justice movements. He was also actively involved with South Bend's First Unitarian Church. In the 1960s, they were vocal against the war in Vietnam and in favor of African American equality. It's likely that outspokenness provoked someone to bomb the church in 1968. Dale wrote an in-depth history of that tragic event, and we'll link to it in the show notes. In 2003, David Healey from the Civil Rights Heritage Center sat down with Dale Gibson. They talked about Dale's early remembrance of South Bend, how that incident in college affected him, and how that led to a life devoted to the First Unitarian Church, childhood education, and the fight for justice.
South Bend. Mr. Gibson, you were born here in South Bend?
Yes, I was.
Where did your father work at?
He worked at the South Bend Bait Company.
And your mother, did she work outside home?
She did not work, no.
She stayed at home?
Yes, she did.
What schooling did you receive here in South Bend?
I went to Jefferson School for elementary and junior high and Adams High School.
Did you have any minority students at either school?
Yes, there were minority students at both schools. As I recall, at Jefferson, they may not have come until 7th grade, and then there were some also at Adams.
Did you ever see any African American teachers at either school?
No.
Were you aware of any discrimination in South Bend's restaurants or recreational facilities when you were growing up?
At the time that I was growing up, I probably wasn't aware of it.
When did you become aware of racial discrimination?
Well, firsthand. We had an exchange student staying with us in our fraternity house from Howard University. And I took him one day, and we were going to go out to a local swimming hole around the school there. And when we got there, the owner said that he wouldn't be allowed to swim there. I, of course, was embarrassed and angry and everything else, and that experience sort of changed my life, really, in regard to civil rights.
So you became a real activist then?
After that, I began to become much more interested in it, yes.
You mentioned that you returned to South Bend in the 60s?
I did. I came back here in 1960. Mm-hmm.
What was South Bend like in 1960? Do you have any remembrance?
Well, racially, it's still pretty segregated, and things were just beginning to happen, and I came back as a teacher, and I remember that the sit-ins were just beginning down Nashville, some of the other parts of the South, and this was one of the things that I was trying to teach my students about at the time. It was the very beginnings. Of course, the Montgomery bus boycott had already taken place, but it was sort of the beginnings of the civil rights movement.
Where did you teach at?
I went back and taught at Adams High School.
Okay. Now, you mentioned that you belonged to a Unitarian Church during the 60s.
Yes.
You're still a member, correct?
That's correct.
And this church was very active in both anti-war and civil rights movement here in South Bend.
That's correct. The minister that came to serve us in 1965 was very concerned about racial discrimination and poverty, as well as the war in Vietnam. And so he took an active role in the community on all of these areas.
Can you give some specific instances where he...
I remember when a Ku Klux Klan caravan went through South Bend, he was standing out with his signs opposing what they stood for.
Here he has a sign, "We mourn Schorner, Cheney, and Goodman," in reference to the three civil rights workers who were murdered in Mississippi. And he's standing on a bridge. Do you remember what bridge that is?
That's right there over on Michigan Street, over the river. Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And what was his name?
His name was Reverend Joe Schneiders. And he became very active in many of the local organizations. I know he was arrested in a sit-in at the school administration building in April of 1968. He, along with many other people, other ministers.
Do you recall what that sit-in was? What prompted that sit-in at the...
That sit-in was prompted by the action of a off-duty police officer / security guard at Washington High School, who, as we understood it, roughed up a student who didn't have his shirt tail tucked in. And
he roughed up a black student.
It was a black student, yes. Right.
So you had a sit-in at the administration building. Do you remember the outcome of that?
Well, eventually the police came and told everybody to leave, and when everybody didn't leave, they started arresting. There were a lot of people arrested that night. I can't say exactly how many, but I think it would be between 50 and 100.
So you had a very large turnout at this.
There was quite a few people there, yes.
Your pastor was instrumental in starting this?
Well, I don't know that he started it, but he took part in that sit-in, and he was arrested, yes.
Now, the church itself was bombed in August of '68, and I had been told that it was basically in response to the anti-war movement, but you've told me that may not be the case. Can you explain that a little bit more?
Well, the church was active in both areas, in civil rights and in the anti-war movement. And since the person who did it was never caught, I don't think we can say definitively which one of those they were protesting about. But that beautiful old building was burned beyond repair.
Well, that is probably more than just a coincidence. However, as you said, the arsonist was never caught. What do you think? I mean, what do the people think at the church? Do they have an idea who this is?
We have no idea at all who might have done this. I will say, though, that the church received a great deal of support following this incident, not only from other churches in the area, but from many individuals, many churches, including St. Joe Catholic Church and many others. The Temple offered to let us hold our services at their churches, and so we did receive a great deal of support once our building had been destroyed.
So you were teaching at Adams at the height of the Civil Rights Movement?
Yes, I was.
Do you remember how many minority students were there?
There were quite a few.
So there had been a significant increase in enrollment of minority students from when you went there as a student and you came back as a teacher?
There had been, yes, there had been. A few years later, I was transferred out to LaSalle High School. This would have been during the 68-69 school year. And at that time, there was a lot more friction. The Black Power movement, you might say, had become stronger. The Civil Rights movement had become a little more militant. And there were several near riots that I remember that year at LaSalle High School. Many times, you'd come out of school and there'd be a dozen police cars around.
Really? At LaSalle?
At LaSalle.
So this would be after Martin Luther King's assassination.
That was 68. It was after his assassination, yes. I remember it was a very trying time for all of us. Of course, there were many riots that broke out around the country after that happened. I also recall that in our church, the minister, Reverend Schneiders, just asked people to come up and express how this had made them feel. And there were some very beautiful things said at that service.
So, was your church white and black? Or
It was predominantly white. We did have black members.
have you noticed access to opportunities have increased for African Americans here in South Bend compared to when you were growing up?
I do think that if you're in teaching, since that's what I was in, and you're African American, that you have had good training and good preparation and everything, your chances are fairly good at getting a job. However, we know there are still many well-educated black people who are having a hard time finding work. It's not that the whole thing is solved.
So we still have a lot of work to do.
There's still a lot more to be done, in my opinion, yes.
What do you think we should do?
Well, having been in education, I've always been an advocate of starting it early and getting kids ready to go to kindergarten. When they get there, making sure they have a lot of support systems. So in those lines, I think a lot more could probably be done. And I'm looking at more than just testing kids like is being done under the present administration and saying, if you don't test up to par, your school fails. And, I think a lot more is going to have to be done in preschool and early education. I feel that there's been backsliding. I really do. There's still an awful lot of black unemployment. There's an awful lot of black people who populate our prisons. And I think there's still a lot of need for, I don't know how to put it, except for encouragement and support in the educational process.
Well, again, I thank you very much, and that will conclude our interview for today.
Thank you.
South Bend's Own Words was created by Kevin Tidmarsh and me, George Garner. This episode was produced by Donald Britton from the Ernestine M. Racklin School of the Arts at IU South Bend, and by me through the Civil Rights Heritage Center. Visit us and learn how IU South Bend students inspired the transformation of a once segregated South Bend swimming pool. We give guided tours and offer public events that show how the history of oppression echoes through the city today. See and hear more history, plan your visit, or share your thoughts about this episode, all at crhc.iusb.edu.